And we had a situation where we had a malicious insider, somebody who was writing the thing that crawled and built the index, that you would search against. And they fired this person, but he had written a backdoor into his code. And so the backdoor allowed him to destroy the index and would set the company back, right? Like it was a real business impact. And it was the first time I ever saw a business impact for a cybersecurity incident. I was up close. Like I worked on the investigation with the team that I was doing. We hired, folks from the outside who were, professionals to come in and do the investigation. But I was like a front row seat to that. And I was like, this work is interesting. The defensive side of this is actually really interesting. It's a much harder problem than offense in some ways. And I saw the consequences like up close. And I was like, oh, okay. And it kind of informed my opinion, like, yeah, the offensive and like breaking machines is cool, but like the defensive side is also very, very interesting. Like I better keep that in the back of my mind.
Hey, this is Dave Johnson.
And I'm Tyler Zito.
Welcome to the Job Security Podcast. We're here to explore the unique perspectives and stories of the people who make this industry what it is, whether they realize it or not. So, the Job Security Early Adopters series is a showcase of unique and talented individuals with great stories about the early days of cybersecurity. As you know, early adopters generally represent about 13.5% of the people who have started to enjoy a new technology. And some of us go back a ways into the early days of the internet. Some of us were there when the first firewall was lit. With me today is Jay Beal, who has a storied background including tool building, like pirates.
Yeah.
Am I saying it correct?
Sorry, it's a Greek word.
Bastille Linux, to name a few. Many training sessions, running companies as the CEO and CTO, like InGuardians, and thoroughly enjoys helping companies by breaking into places to make sure no one can break into those places. And Greg Notch is a seasoned veteran of cyber leadership and conference community member with over 20 years of direct experience, including one of the most challenging gigs in the CISO seat, being the CISO for the NHL. Jay, Greg, good to have you here.
Hey, good to be here.
So I want to start with primarily one question. What was your earliest memory in cybersecurity?
Oh, don't make me go first. Wow. Let's see. For me, it was, I was working at a university and I was actually a grad student. I was a PhD student in math. And I was also working in the computer science department as a research assistant. But on the side, I was being a Unix sysadmin for the math department that I was studying in. And I was having a blast. I was learning a lot. I was basically plowing through with like an O'Reilly book and then everything I could find online as fast as I humanly could. And so I was having this experience where it's like, wait, I'm pretty sure we got a hacker in here. And my boss was like, well, I don't know. It doesn't seem to like we can do security later. Right now, I want to make sure we have a good inventory of all of these systems that we have in the department. And I'm like, oh my God, the priorities. I don't get it. I mean, nowadays, actually, Greg could probably tell us why that might have been a really good idea if you want to do incident response.
Oh, the GRT just showed up. Yeah, the GRT team showed up into the security program.
So anyway, it was the like, well, or it's like, hey, if we're gonna find everywhere this person is, maybe we should know what we have, and maybe like in my doing an inventory, perhaps I guess to put the best face on it might have been the early face of threat hunting. But anyway, I didn't really love the priority there, and I was as I said, I was a PhD student in math, and I've been going. Oh my God, I'm going to date myself. But I've been going to these parties. Well, I've been going to these things on Friday nights where people watch Babylon 5. So I've been going to these parties of other people who liked this show to watch the show, and started talking to somebody, and I was telling him everything I was doing with Unix and Linux, and he's like, that's really cool. That's kind of my job. Would you, I don't know if you'd ever be willing to, leave the university, but would you come and meet my boss sometime? So I came to meet the boss and came to meet the boss, and the boss then hired me on the spot. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm leaving university. This sounds really fun. The boss said, you're going to be a Unix system administrator, or sysadmin. And, but since you have a special interest in security, we'll let you do security projects. And my special interest was just, I was talking about my frustration that we weren't trying to track or repel our hacker. And, and so boss was like, okay, so for the first 2 months, you'll do our security projects. We've got a little backlog list. I was like, sure. And I don't know, I got 2-3 weeks in, I'd finished the list, but they'd already added more things to the list. And over time, it was just like, okay, you know, I guess he's our security person. And so they'd pull me in, they'd be like, a vendor wants to sell us something. Can you see if that's a good something? And I come in and listen to the whole thing and be like, that's anyway. We'll save what I thought of some of the products, but for later if you like. But all of a sudden, I'm the security person. My job title never changed. That place didn't get like it. I think the after me. I think once we started hiring a team for security, people started getting security titles. But security was like really common back then, and this is so long ago that I'm afraid to tell you that it was 1999. And back then, yeah, at least half the people I ever met working security, if not more, didn't formally have a security title. They were just a technologist in some area or another, and they were filling some needs. And so for me, part of my story there was that at that university, one of the things they wanted me to do is to write a hardening script. It's not something to take a Unix system um, and lock it down. And so I wrote a hardening script, and it was to understand why you need it. Like if you took a Solaris system and you just installed it, base install, you had like 65 ports that were all listening. And they had all kinds of services. And so if there was a vulnerability in any of them, even though you weren't using 55 of the 65 that were running, that you were just rolling dice on whether you were gonna get popped. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well, and you're
Sorry.
in and I'm at a university, and universities like routinely back then, like everything would have a public IP address. Like you could NAT, but universities had gotten on the internet early enough that they had enormous blocks of IP space. So they gave everything a direct internet accessible IP address, and did virtually no firewalling. So I wrote them a hardening script, and then I found out at a SANS conference that there was a group of other university folks led by the now late John Lasser, and who was trying to make a Linux distribution for universities that would be like Red Hat, but like Red Hat Linux, but locked down. And and so when I met John, and he's like, well, if you've written a hardening script, maybe you could write the script that would just take an existing Linux distribution, because this is taking us a while. We're finding out Linux distributions are a lot of work. And so I wrote that script, and ended up being really useful all over the place. Um, so that's kind of like, I guess that's kind of how I got into security. My first memories was just basically falling into it because I was interested, and then having that really lucky situation where people are like, okay, you can keep doing that thing you're passionate about, because we have need. And yeah, sure, fine.
It's really interesting to me. I feel like that's a common story that you hear a lot from people who've been in security for a while. Cybersecurity is sort of an evolving discipline. People are, for a while there, they were trying to figure out what it was and how to go about it. And a lot of people seem to kind of fall into that. And before they know it, you've been swimming around in the water, and before you know it, you're like, oh, this is what I do now. I guess I'm the security guy. Greg, when we were talking yesterday, it sounds like in some ways that's your story as well. Tell us about how you got
sure. I mean,
cyber.
even more similarities than I thought. I also was recruited out of college to be a Unix sysadmin, and that was how I started my entire technology career. So, a separate, very congruent story there. I was trying to decide like how far to set the the Wayback Machine because, like, I mean, my first like computer experiences were all like, oh, this system's cool. How can I break it? Like, oh, yeah, how can I make this do something that it's not supposed to do? Whether it was, removing the copy protection of it for a game or like getting access to something that I shouldn't. Like, I definitely started there, and even as I like began my technology career, like security was always like the job of the people that were running the systems or the networks, particularly networks, but also systems. Like you kind of, or at least a certain subset of people were all about like, well, wait a minute, like how could this go wrong, and how do I keep that from going wrong? And Clifford Stoll's The Cuckoo's Egg and like early stuff. You're like, oh well, that could actually happen. So I don't know how far back to set the Wayback Machine, but like I remember going to like the Beyond Hope
All the
All
way.
the way.
all the way back,
Hot
like
tub time machine, baby. We're going all
all
the
the
way.
way, like cracking games on
Hell
my Apple
yes,
IIe. Like,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Uh, Maybe in college, like writing a kernel exploit for Next Step that bypassed NFS security controls, or maybe like later on, you know, some Solaris hacking here and there. Just maybe working on the Xbox Media Center team, like doing things where systems were they were vulnerable and needed like and had and was interesting how the machines would fail and how you could get into them. I mean, on the professional side, I think really my security career began. This is, I guess, a story I can tell now. I was working for Alta Vista, for those of you who are old enough to remember the time before Google, and I worked on the team that built data centers for them. So like infrastructure and networking was like you again, like everybody's side hustle. If you did networking and infrastructure with security, you always had that component. And we had a situation where we had a malicious insider, somebody who was writing the thing that crawled and built the index, that you would search against, and they fired this person, but he had written a backdoor into his code. And so the backdoor allowed him to destroy the index and would set the company back, right? Like there was a real business impact. And it was the first time I ever saw a business impact for a cybersecurity incident. I was up close. Like I worked on the investigation with the team like that I was doing. We hired, folks from the outside who were, professionals, to come in and do the investigation. But I was like a front row seat to that. And I was like, this work is interesting. Like the defensive side of this is actually really interesting. It's a much harder problem than offense in some ways. And so I saw the consequences like up close, and I was like, oh, okay. And so I kind of informed my opinion, like, yeah, the offensive and like breaking machines is cool, but like the defensive side is also very, very interesting. How, like, I better keep that in the back of my mind. So, build infrastructure for them and did a bunch of other more like, I'd say, IT and systems and networking work for a bunch of companies. And I remember at the NHL at one point, like it's still like security kind of hadn't crested the wave where like your CFOs and like management like cared about it. Like it was like something that your tech people kind of took care of. And like, sure, like banks and other rigid industries had this, like had solutions for this, but it wasn't like everybody needed it. And then the Sony breach happened. And all of a sudden, and like, the CEO's emails are like, in the New York Times, and like people like execs are getting fired. And like, like it is like all of a sudden board of directors, even I was working in media entertainment at the NHL, right? So like all of a sudden other people started to pay attention, like, oh, well, like this has some real consequences. And, like I had seen business consequences for cyber breaches before. I hadn't like, it wasn't something that was talked about. And all of a sudden it was a problem people cared about.
Yeah,
I think
TJX was a huge one for me. I remember seeing that and going, wow, that was okay. That's big. That's huge. Nowadays, that's relatively small in comparison, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, Target, like there was a bunch of them that had like real consequences. And I think all of a sudden businesses started to pay attention to it. I mean, if I even rewind to the Wayback Machine, I remember when I first moved to New York and I was a sysadmin, like I would go to the Hope conferences and go to like 2600 meetings and meet by the payphone in the City Court building. And like, like that. And I remember talking to those, but they were mostly Unix system administrators and operators, and then a bunch of like BBS kids, right, who were like breaking stuff. And they'd all come together and they'd share information. But like, they like it hadn't like that. Those two streams hadn't crossed really for me. I wasn't going to DEF CON then. I wasn't going to the big security conferences. Those dreams hadn't crossed me until all of a sudden it became real for a business that I worked at. And then all of a sudden it was real. Like, it was like, okay, like CFO was like, what are we going to do about this? At the time, the commissioner of the NHL was like, we should do something. And so I put together this plan. I was like, hey, like we should probably hire a person who's done this before and like hire some people and like, here's some tools you should maybe buy. And like, I don't know, it's going to look something like this. Here's what you should call. Like, so here, like, let's go do it. And then they were like, when can you start? And so I kind of like first security job was like, you know, on top of my other two jobs. So just like all of the other, security being part of a technologist job, like was like, oh, okay, I guess I got to figure out how to do this for real now. And that was, that was when all of a sudden I sort of crossed out like, okay, this is now something I am focusing more than part of my attention on. So, yeah.
So I went to my first security conference was Hope 2000. And I was too young to go by myself. So I had to take my dad.
Oh, nice.
And and he's an old, he worked at Texas Instruments. He worked for the Air Force doing aircraft repair, radio repair, etc. And he liked computers. He worked on some early ones and some like punch card based computers and stuff like that. And so I brought him and I went to a bunch of conferences and so on and so forth, a bunch of talks. And I learned so much, and I found so many other people, because I had been, 2000, I had been kind of doing security stuff for about 3 years back then. So like my earliest cybersecurity memory is, so I'm 11 years old. I'm trying to log into a machine. It won't let me. It's got Novell NetWare on it. It's my elementary school library or middle school. And I noticed that if you click, so when you log in, it said, username and admin. I didn't have those. But if you right click on the question mark in the top left-hand corner, it gives you a drop down and it asks you what you want to open it with. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't know. Open with Explorer. And so I selected that and it opened a tunnel with write access into the rest of the machine, and I could just change all the permissions I wanted, and then I had full access to the machine. I could print stuff for free, which was like amazing considering the cost of printed materials. And then, all the other, fun things that happen afterwards. But as I got into that more, I started to hear about conferences that were happening. I had just seen the movie Hackers. I thought that was neat. And I was not necessarily the best rollerblader, but I wanted to be. And I knew about Kevin Mitnick. I had read the book, I think around that same time, and had basically started like early 2600 meetings and so on and so forth. And then ended up at Hope 2000. And I learned so much. Went to 2002, went to DEF CON the following year. And it was just like, it was all downhill from there. Got a job offer from the head of security at Microsoft. And this is DEF CON 9 or 10. And he's like, hey, it sounds like you know what you're doing as far as like firewall security. He was listening to a conversation my friends and I were having. And he's like, you should come work for me. And at the time I was like, I don't know. I haven't heard great things about Microsoft.
Well, at the time you were right. So there is that.
And I'm 16, so I can't technically like work there yet, or can I? And he's like, call me when you're ready to come work here. And I lost the card. I should have called.
Will you sign my working papers?
Exactly. I would have literally needed permission from my parents to work at Microsoft.
I had this weird experience where like I was 14 and my parents had gone for a job fair for themselves, and they had met people from a small startup that was called Bethesda Softworks, which was a like 30-person company at the time. And so Bethesda Softworks needed QA people. They needed beta testers. They needed people to play games and get paid for finding bugs. And so they, so my parents, sent me in, and I went and talked to their lead programmer, and he's like, okay, yeah. So I ended up getting a minimum wage job. I think they actually accidentally paid me 5 cents below minimum wage for a while. But like doing play testing, doing QA, and eventually ended up running their QA department while I was still in high school. Because
Wow,
yeah,
that's
similar to
amazing.
Greg, it's the like people end up just being like, yeah, it seems like you can do some of this, you can do some of this leadership stuff, and you're like, and they're like, no, just try, you'll be fine. And but the crazy thing for me, and part of the reason I mention it, is like in some ways that was my first security job, um, because you know don't tell anybody. But for all of us offensive security people, for all of us OffSec folks, um, we're kind of QA folks who found a way to like make it cool. I mean, not that I've ever been cool, but like the hoodies and all that, like the massive, like just way huge, cool, like hackers moving and so on. But what are we doing? We're looking for ways to find out, like, well, what happens if I put in some input that might be unexpected? What happens if I click here? What happens if I and hell, it's a very, very related job. We just get to have a lot more fun with it.
I think that was the cool thing about, and I think it's still, you'll see pockets of it still. I didn't do DEF CON, or I didn't do a lot of the bigger conferences until much later. But like you see it now, which was like, these are rooms full of people with effectively insatiable curiosity for like how these things work. And they're especially early, like I'm talking pre-internet or pre like, ubiquitous internet, like they're like that information sharing components, like, hey, I found this thing. And like you're on BBSs with people, like, and like, oh, hey, I found this thing. And like, the people are gluing stuff together. Like I remember distinctly when Aleph dropped, and I didn't even know it was in Frac. It was a text file on a BBS that I was on about the smashing stack thing. And I was like, holy,
Smashing the stack for
okay.
fun and profit.
And yeah, 100%. And like those early communities of folks, whether they were, on a BBS or, near a payphone in Citicorp or at Hope or whatever, like, Dave's talking, like you just get a bunch of people who are just insanely curious about how technology works and a little bit mischievous. Maybe a little socially awkward, and that like brew of like it launched an entire, you know, thing. And then the internet took off, and then all of a sudden, people who weren't using computers before, like all of a sudden everyone was using computers, right? Like everyone had a couple, and then all of a sudden it sort of was like the thing that grew alongside of it. And I just remember those really interesting and intense like conversations with like my fellow nerds on like, hey, how do you wait, did you figure this little piece out? Like, oh, you have a manual for that? Hey, can you share that with me? Like, hey, how did, and like, there wasn't really any, like I go back to Bug Track again. It wasn't like Bug Track wasn't like a bunch of people being malicious, being like, hey, this is like, if Bug Track existed right now on the dark web, it would be called the com, right? Like, it's not the malice wasn't there though. It was like, these are just people sharing information and like trying to help each other understand, like trying to understand the systems that they were using. And, sure, there were some malicious actors in there and people, but like there was nothing to steal in either, right? Or very little to steal. So it was a pure like pursuit of knowledge. And I guess to the title of this podcast, right, is like those early adopters that represent, if you want to call it crossing the chasm, the early adopters there, like those are because there was no well-trod path. There was no like, oh, you can go get yeah, you can go get a master's in computer. There wasn't even SANS, right? There wasn't like you could go get a course in pen testing. There certainly wasn't a master's in computer science or a master's in cybersecurity that you could go get. Like there was none of that, right? It was just like, well, all right, Unix. I mean, basically the bar was Unix. You were not there were Windows hackers, and you were either a networking guy who was like building an ISP, or you were a Unix guy who was like building like scalable systems in some way or another. Like you were kind of like those were the early indicators. I don't know if that matches your experience, Jay, but like those are definitely strongly represented groups and people I talk.
You know what I find interesting here? Both of you have kind of joked about stumbling into leadership opportunities. But a part of that though is you both teaching yourselves how to do the job while you're doing the job. And to me, as a non-cybersecurity practitioner, those two things, cybersecurity and you doing that, feel connected in a way. Like in cybersecurity, it seems like you always have to be curious, always have to be trying to tinker and figure out how things work and learning and changing. And leadership's the same way. You just need a little bit of charisma, you know? And so it seems like those two things, it seems like you both were teed up well for leadership, just through your innate curiosity being a
I
techie,
think it's
you know?
helpful, but like there are books like Jack Welch and others have written books about like leadership and management. There was prior art and in a lot of ways. I mean, not that I sought it out particularly until later, but the like there at least was something to grab a hold of, like MBAs existed, and so there wasn't a like, okay, here's the set of the body of knowledge. I mean, even the conceptual stuff didn't exist. It was like, well, how to think about defending a network. There was no MITRE, there was no kill chain, there was no CIA triad, there were no 13 domains of NIST 853. Like there's none of that art
I mean, we were
existed,
early
right?
enough in
Like,
that you
so
got to, that you got to participate in creating the kind of like the lists and the lists that became the standards that became the hardening guides. Um, and it's, I don't know. Yeah. And I will echo, I'll echo, um, I'll echo what Greg said on the leadership side is at least there are lots of books and all that. I mean, like I will say that um, a lot of leadership stuff came up for me. Like, I don't know, I don't know if this is how it was for you, Greg, but it's also the like, you're a kid in junior high and there's a group project to be run and you get chosen to lead the thing. And, it just seems to keep happening over and over again. People are like, yeah, you do it, and like, okay, well, or you're like, hey, I really feel like it'd be better if we like actually created a system around how we do this. Cause, and people are like, yep, that's what you're going to do. But I think I don't want to claim charisma. So yeah.
Get out of here.
What I'll say is, I think like for leaders, part of it's that like maybe it might be that systems thinking, or might be the just giving a rat's butt about something that maybe other people aren't, or just haven't found a voice to give, to say they care about. Um, but probably like more than charisma, I think um, the central, I don't want to call it quality because I think it's a skill. The central skill might be empathy, right? It's just to like actually like, at least if you're,
that was the word that I was thinking.
yeah,
100%.
like when my business partners in Guardians gave me the CEO role a few years back. And when they did, I had that same experience at one of my biggest blind spots. I mean, it's leadership is,
Yeah.
I think leadership is, every leader I've ever talked to has shared this part of the experience with me. It's very humbling. Everyone thinks you're going to walk. Everyone thinks, you get some kind of role and you're going to, like, Greg's a CISO. There's no way he walks around just ordering people to do things. Actually, the ordering probably happens far, far less than it ever could have at lower titles. He's got it's a lot more of like influence, or a lot more figuring out what people actually care about and trying to line up what they care, like who cares about this with the where do we have a need, or and so on. So but yeah.
I mean, that's a form of hacking, though. The self-awareness and then taking your project management skills and then reapplying it to yourself and going like basically project manage thyself. Like you're leveraging that same insatiable curiosity, flexibility of mind, asking the right questions and not being afraid to ask questions like, I think to me the most powerful, the thing that separates offensive security, especially in security, from like all other things that I've in forms of engineering, is the question, why not? But to me, that's kind of the ethos of hacking. It's like creating something, taking one thing and making it do something it was not originally designed to do.
Yeah, there's a big difference in mindset between how an engineer looks at a problem and how a cybersecurity person looks at a problem. Like they're bounded in their thinking differently. I want to go back to one thing that Jay said, because it was super important, is like that curiosity is a major advantage in leadership, and coupled with the empathy. You got it. The thing is, the system that you become curious about is not hardware, software, networks. It's human interaction and how groups of people, like team dynamics and how they work together and what motivates people and all the different kinds of people, and realizing like, I got to modulate my communication style because they don't all think the same way I do. And like you learn like those systems about people and recognizing that there's like infinite variation to that. And so I find it it's like the hardest part of being a leader. And by the way, like, I think I will say the same things about being a leader for as long as I am. It's like, yeah, I do that. I'm still learning. Like, still got a long way to go. Like, maybe someday I'll get there, but like, I feel like it's like parenting. Like, the more I do it, I'm like, I know way less than I did before.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
And one of the things I tell an early, like people who tell me now, like, oh, I want to they're especially technical people who are like, hey, I want to be a manager. I want to be a leader. I'm like, cool. Tell me the last 3 books you read for work. And invariably they'll tell me like, some Python book or some AI thing that they've been reading or whatever. I'm like, cool. Like, what was the last book on like team dynamics or like how to like about human psychology or just like leadership in general you read? And you see like a bunch of them are like, yeah, but like, I'll just figure that out. Like, no. This is it's a whole discipline of its own. And like, you just watch them like, well, like if you want to get really good at that, you have to be a student of people, teams, companies, finance, even in the way that you were about like, assembler op codes, like, TCP headers and like all of the bits and bytes that you were, you did early career, all of like, oh, well, how can I smash this stack or how do I do this memory corruption vulnerability or whatever it is? You're like, no. Like my memory corruption vulnerability now is like, how do I motivate someone during this one-on-one? Like, it's not or how do I find out what's important to them or what they care about? And like, show up with some empathy for where they might be, but still like achieve the goals that we're trying to achieve at the company. Like the curiosity part is like super important. I think a lot of people miss that. And I think it gives people who are, I guess, hackers or an edge, because I think there's a lot of not curious people. But I think if you were to, the percentage of very curious people who work in this industry is very high. It's very, and so I think that's a kind of a secret weapon in some ways.
There's an old phrase, I'm sure everybody listening to this has heard, curiosity killed the cat, right? It's an old adage. The part that we've forgotten is this was removed, I think, around the time where we became a specialist society, is the phrase, but satisfaction brought it back. And we are very much in our industry in the satisfaction brought it back category, because we are curious, we understand risk, but we also understand that with risk comes new adventures, new discoveries, and then you move on to the next thing. It can be kind of addictive when you're say smashing said stack, and you do that and you go, hey, that was actually really easy, and I at least was able to accomplish that. Now my bar or my threshold for difficulty is higher, and now I've got to try new things. While I was doing that, I learned other stuff. And or you share it with somebody and you teach it to them. While you're teaching them, you then learn more things that you hadn't thought of prior, because they ask questions that you never thought to ask, which is one of the other things that I see a lot of. And you alluded to this earlier, Greg, like there wasn't much as far as ability to find information in the early days. And our early days were the late 90s, roughly. But there were people who were willing to teach and share. And now there's even more than ever. And that in turn can teach us stuff. I didn't want to ask. So Jay, you and I ran into each other at Black Hat. I smashed into you while you were chatting with Jeff Mann and like interrupted your conversation, but we chatted about a couple of things. But do you guys know each other by any chance? Have you crossed paths
with Jeff? Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh
no,
with Greg.
With
yeah,
Greg.
yeah. Greg and I can't figure out when we first met, because we bump into each other on a every so many years basis and have conversations and then say we need to talk next week. Then forget to.
If my brain works correctly, which is suspect, I believe highly suspect. I believe it was at an early, like right when I took on the CISO gig at the NHL, I started taking a bunch of SANS classes, and I think I ran into you with like Ed Scotus and Larry Pesci and like that cohort, like early. But like again, we're talking, it could be fuzzy, but and then at Black Hat and DEF CON for sure.
That sounds about right. Yeah, you're talking about a couple of my mentors. So I would have been following them around.
Yeah, I remember when the In Guardian folks and Sands were like growing in parallel, and and then John Strand kind of did the Black Hills thing, like all of that, like all of those folks were like really like instrumental for me in like starting to put together like, well, I know a little bit about hacking, but like, how do you actually like handle information security for an enterprise? Like all of them were like super helpful. And again, to the point of like the theme here is like super generous with their time. I remember emailing Ed like endless amounts of dumb questions, and like he would just be patient and like answer and be like, well, don't do that. Like, yeah, like the folks that just were willing to just to help, which is amazing.
Ed's an amazing teacher, and his ability to also like pinpoint down to the most important thing to learn in a given spot is just is pretty epic.
Time check here. We got about 4 minutes left. I got a question for you. As a non-security practitioner, speaking to two gentlemen who have been in security for quite a long time. No offense. What is one thing that's true about security back when you entered into security that still remains true today? In an industry that is constantly changing, things are always evolving.
Always going to get in.
They're always going to get in. 100% failure rate.
Yeah, with sufficient motivation, time, and effort, they're going to get in.
It's very depressing sometimes that way, isn't it? No, it means our field gets to stick around forever, or for hopefully a long, long time. I think it's one that we've highlighted over and over again, that like, so first it's all about learning. It's all about learning, and you'll end up teaching yourself a bunch, but you'll learn from other people, and then you'll pass it along. And one of the coolest things about what we've done, like, is that like Greg and I both started out on BBSs apparently. Like way before I got access to the internet, I was on BBSs. And BBSs were kind of one of those big places where it's like, wait, what are we doing in socializing here? A huge amount of what we're doing socializing on BBS is saying, hey, I learned this thing. Let me tell you about it. And everybody else doing the same thing. And I think that's the great thing. Like for me, the thing that when I thought that I was pursuing a math PhD and thought I was going to become a professor and switch tracks, and somebody encouraged me, the first question I asked him was, yeah, but I'm kind of really, really attracted to university because I want to learn. I want to constantly learn, and I like teaching too. And I really like teaching. So, like, is there any? Do you get to learn in this area you're in, or do you just like you have to learn, for the first year, and after that, it's just you're just doing the same thing? It's like, oh, you're gonna like it here. It's that's our film.
Do you get to learn?
Yeah, do you get to learn?
Do you get to learn?
Like, and the answer is like, do you get to? You have to, like, constantly. It's freaking great.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can't
not everything
learn.
that I ever learned and knew about software exploitation and network exploitation, no longer valid.
All right, Greg or Dave, lead us out, man.
All right. Well, hey, thank you both for being on the show. It was really great hearing about your backgrounds and kind of where you got started. And there's a lot to be said for getting in early, and you also get great stories as a result. So, that's one of the benefits. Speaking to those people who are now early adopters in AI, looking forward to having you on the show in 10 years. So,
there you go.
Sounds awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Job Security Podcast, sponsored by Expel MDR. This podcast was co-hosted by Dave Johnson and Tyler Zito and was produced by me, Ben Baker. If you've enjoyed what you heard today, please consider giving us a glowing 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice. And be sure to follow us on YouTube for more cybersecurity content at youtube.com/@expelsecurity. We'll catch you next time.